Hello, everyone. Welcome to Sony's Creators Conference. Thank you for being here today. I'm Yiotis Katsambas, and I'm the Executive Director of Technology at Sony Pictures Animation. So if I was an engineer working for space, the one thing I'll probably look for is robustness. We're going to spend billions of dollars to send something in space. We want to make sure it's not going to break down when it gets into those harsh conditions. There's nobody there to repair it. So there's a lot of planning that goes into making these devices. And one of the top things is, of course, failure is not an option. And there's also a very highly controlled environment as you build these machines that are going to go out in space. There's also a very tight list of components that you're going to use when you build these devices. And you can go to Home Depot in the middle of making something and buy something, a part that you might need to build something that's going to go into space. And if I was an engineer working on production, the top thing that I'd be looking for in this case probably be image quality. And as we're producing a movie, there is a linear process that starts from the beginning of production to the end of production. And data flows from department to department. And as engineers, we look for ways to increase efficiency as we go between departments and also improve the quality of the images by looking into new rendering techniques, looking into new workflows that artists can follow, and then train the artists in these new workflows and new tools that we might build so that way we can make the best looking movies. And this is a slide from Spider-Verse, and I know there's upcoming presentations from a sister company, ImageWorks, later on today, where they're going to show some of the cool process that they developed for the movie. By the way, there is more seats on this side if you'd like to come in and have a sit on over here, be more comfortable. So yeah. But if you're engineering for pre-production, the top thing that we look for, this is the area that we focus in, is creativity. And the pre-production process is not so much about image quality. It's not about robustness. Failure is an option. It's OK if something breaks. We're there to fix it. And the things that we look for is how do we improve creativity. And there hasn't really been that much talk around creativity and how do you engineer for creativity. And since I've been doing this for decades now, I thought it'd be cool to give this presentation, spark some new ideas, conversation going to see how we can also improve creativity, engineering creativity. And I imagine that this process in pre-production that requires and focuses on creativity is the same across multiple industries. So if we're designing a car, it'd be a similar thing. We focus on coming up with really cool ideas for a car. And I thought like some of the ideas that I bring out today could be shared across multiple industries. And one of the reasons I like this slide, it also kind of shows like this electrical tape. So maybe they do go to Home Depot and buy some parts, if you're pre-production for car engineering versus space. So anyway, so what is engineering for creativity? And what are some of the things that I learned when I moved from engineering for production into engineering for pre-production? So I work at Sony Pictures Animation, as I said before. And over the years, since I started working there, we've developed tons of really creative movies with unique styles, most recently released across the Spider-Verse. And we have a lot of upcoming shows. We have a movie that I'm really excited about called K-pop. And we also got into series recently. We released Agent King, was recently on Netflix. So a lot of really exciting stuff happening at Sony Pictures Animation. We have a team of amazing engineers, some of them here today. And we built a lot of apps that focus on managing our work and a lot of tools, as I mentioned, to improve artists' creativity. So what is pre-production? So pre-production is the steps from starting with the idea for a movie to get into production. And most of the graphs that you will see is sort of a linear process where you have this idea, you do some designs, you do some storyboards, and then you're ready to start production. But it's nothing but, pre-production is chaos. It takes a lot of twists and turns. And there is zero movies, zero projects that we worked on so far that the end result is the same as the original storyboards that were presented. We go through tons of changes. The movie evolves through the pre-production process. in unexpected ways. And that's part of the creative process that we focus on. I showed this to a director, by the way, and he saw the slide and he said, that looks too simple. You know? All right, so also department workflow. So we have multiple departments working in pre-production. We have VizDev, we have story, we have editorial, character design, all these departments collaborating together. And I mentioned earlier the production pipeline, and there's a line going across departments, and there's a way that data will flow from department to department and is nicely organized, and you try to find efficiencies as data flows from department to department. But when I started in pre-production, I was trying to figure out, okay, do storyboards always go from story to editorial? And no, that's not really the case. And again, you know, like as I'm sort of studying this world of pre-production, I realized that this is more the flow of data across multiple departments. It's just done in random ways. Artists are working in parallel all the time, and they all influence each other. So as the storyboard's being done, same time as the edit is being worked on for the very same sequence, same time somebody's doing environment designs, and the environment designs might be influenced by the storyboards. And the storyboard artists also look at the latest designs and update their storyboards, as one example. And also in editorial, you might have a director that's updating storyboard panels at the same time. Story artists are working on the very same sequence. So it's, again, a pretty chaotic flow across these multiple departments. So when I started early on, you know, back in 2007, and I was learning about this, and I was wondering, what did I get myself into now? How do we streamline things? Because, and also I should mention before I get to this next part, but not only do we have this chaos in the workflow from idea to production, and this chaos across multiple departments, but each artist likes to use an application of choice. So you have some story artists that are really comfortable in Photoshop, don't want to touch anything else, and you have other artists that are really comfortable in Storyboard Pro, don't want to touch anything else. And then you have Maya artists, you have Unreal artists, you know, you have Moto, and you have Blender, and you have like these, you know, you know, like these collection of applications. And any time that you will try and force an artist to no, we want you to use Photoshop, it's going to impact their creative process. They're really familiar with the way that the application works, and they just want to keep using that one to create the storyboards. Adding to the complexity, even though, you know, there's chaos across multiple applications, each artist has their own workflow within an application. So if we take Photoshop as an example, you have artists that really like working in the timeline. And if you're not familiar with Photoshop timeline, it lets you select which layers are visible at any particular point. And they come up with a process to create Photoshop files that have multiple storyboard panels using the timeline. Other artists like to break each layer into a storyboard panel. Other artists like to put the background at the bottom, and then each layer on top of it is a storyboard panel. Other artists like to use layer comps. And again, if you try to tell them, you know what, I can automate your process, but if you stick to this one workflow, it's disruptive to the creative process. Also, talking to artists, the one thing that kind of stuck with me from early on days is something a story artist said is, I like drawing on paper because I don't have to worry about technical steps. I don't have to worry about splitting up my layers and saving it in a specific format and cropping in a specific way, or worrying about aspect ratios and all of that stuff. I just pick my piece of paper and I doodle something, and you know, I'm done. You know, like, and I just focus on the creative aspects, and I don't want technology to slow me down. So with all that in mind, going back to this chaos, how do we embrace the chaos and create efficiencies? Well, if you look at more closely, what happens is this, where it's really like what's happening in parallel across pre-production, across all the multiple teams that are working on any project, is artists come up with an idea, they create content, they share the content, review it, come up with new ideas, spins off into its own circles, create content, share it, review it, and it keeps going. So instead of a production pipeline, we have the creative iterations circle. So we as engineers, also just to give you some numbers, and I want to also play some stuff so that I can illustrate a little more what I mean. So just to give you some more context, just the script alone, we get about 2,000 updates from beginning of pre-production to the end of production. And designs, we do on average about 25,000 designs per movie. Across the Spider-Verse, we have about 400,000 storyboard panels. Only 10,000 making it to the movie, by the way. So you can kind of see how many changes happen as the story evolves. And I'm going to play a sequence from one of my favorite movies that we've produced, Mitchells versus the Machines. It's one of my favorites because it's around technology, has to do with robots and AI. So I'm going to play the final release sequence, and I'm going to play an earlier version of the storyboard panels, and I want to talk a little bit more after we play this. So I'm going to play this first.
So all those people are going to be shot into space by Pal? The cell phone lady? Who would have thought a tech company wouldn't have our best interest at heart?
Manchi, don't be scared.
Why are you clutching that large feral hog like it's a child?
That's not a feral hog. It's Manchi.
What? Is that a dog or... Dog, pig, dog, pig, dog, pig, dog, pig, dog. Loaf of bread, system error.
Come on, guys, it's a dog.
All right, cool. Let's play the storyboards.
Human girl, why do you do this?
I just like filming stuff. I make these weird movies. You want to see one?
Hello, Katie.
Ha!
I'm alive now. Even though I'm a hamburger, I want to go to the big city and be a Broadway star. No, God, what?
This is wonderful. No robot could create something so bizarre.
Aw, thank you.
I guess you like them more than some people.
Your human art is baffling. Look at this foolish mother goose. She carries around these small weak geese. Why does she not simply eat them for power?
Of course not, hon. That's her family. That's what we humans do. We look out for each other.
That is most illogical.
Well, if you were in trouble, would you leave your buddy behind?
I would not. This is most curious.
See, we're more alike than we... Are you eating crayons?
No. Yes.
Linda, you better not be teaching that robot to love back there.
That last line was my favorite line. I don't know why I didn't make it into the movie. But I talked to the head of story on this sequence, and I was curious to see why they changed it in the way they changed it, so I can pass on some information on the decision-making process. And he said that this movie is kind of in the middle of the movie, and it has like, the original intent was to use this as character development, but it was slowing down the pace. And as all this action that happened before, and there's all this action coming up, and then in the middle of it, there was this sequence, and it was kind of slowing it down. So as they were reviewing it and sharing the content I mentioned earlier in the creative process, they realized, okay, we need to change this, speed up the pace, doesn't slow down the movie, but also use it as ways to foreshadow what's going to be coming up, following up in the movie. If you haven't seen the movie, check it out, by the way, it's super funny. And also, I wanted to say that it's not that they looked at the screening and they said, oh, we're going to change it, and we're going to change it, and now the robots are going to do this thing, and this is going to be the action from day one to day two. It was, again, a long iterative process. There was 160 versions that I've seen between that version and the version that made it into production, 160 versions. So you can get an idea how things iterate through pre-production process. So what do we do? So how do we embrace the chaos and speed up the process? So the thing that we look for, as I talked about the iteration circle, is how do we remove these any friction points? And what do I mean by friction points? As the artist mentioned once, is that they like the simplicity of drawing on paper, quickly post it on the wall, everybody can see it. And when you work with computers, you don't want the technology to slow you down in any way. So sharing of files in a digital world became a challenge. When you have 400,000 storyboard panels and you're trying to find the latest storyboard panels, it becomes a challenge. Trying to find the one that you want to edit while you're working in an editorial and you will change the facial expression becomes a huge challenge. As a story artist or a vis dev artist, and you want to see the latest designs or the latest storyboards, the latest edits, was becoming a challenge. So how do we make it easier to find the most recent version of the edit? How do we make it easier to synchronize files across multiple locations? How do we hide all that complexity from the artists so that way they can just focus on creative iterations? So we developed Flixi, and Flixi does a lot of stuff for us. And one of the things that it does is it makes it really easy to jump in a sequence and find the most recent version of the edit. So I'm just going to play like a little clip of what it looks like as an artist. So if an artist, I can select my movie. I see all the sequences that make up the movie. I can move my mouse. I can see the sequence play through. So I make sure I'm loading the right sequence. And then you can see all the versions that have been created. If you notice, there was close to about 400 versions for this sequence, the sequence that I played earlier. And as I scroll down, it's color-coded by artists, and you can see the level of collaboration that happens on any of our movies. So from here, I could just click on load the latest version. I could play it in Flixi, and it automatically will load all the latest edit with the audio coming from editorial and the timing coming from editorial. And if I'm a storyboard artist or a director, and I want to edit any of the storyboard panels, I can double-click on a panel. It will open up for me in my application of choice, whether that's Photoshop or Storyboard Pro. I can edit it. It will save back and synchronize it so that everybody else can access it no matter where they are in the world. So, by embracing the chaos, and creating this application, we just hide some of that complexity behind the scenes. The other thing that I wanted to point out is I talked about the chaos of data flow across multiple departments. And it kind of seems obvious after the fact. But, like the one key central thing that we did was to put Flixi in the middle. So you have all these departments. If all the departments can be accessing one central app, then what we could do is we could use that as means to share data across multiple departments in any sort of chaotic way. So if I'm working on a sequence in editorial and I want to publish it using Flixi, I can publish it back to the storyboard department. Or if I'm doing previews, I can load it from Flixi and send it to Maya, and I can edit it in Maya, send it to Unreal. So you can have like all these super chaotic workflows. And in order to make that happen, the other central idea behind Flixi was instead of writing tools within an app, like if I was on the production side, the things that I would get used to is you build a whole pipeline, within Maya or within Unreal or whatever app your choice is, and that controls how the data flows across multiple departments. But the choice that we made for Flixi was to create these importers exporters, and so there will be an importer exporter to Avid as an example, and by doing that, and then it can be an importer exporter to Premiere. And by doing that, it meant that you can publish and edit from Avid into Flixi, and from Flixi, you can publish it into Premiere. And from Premiere, you can publish it back to Flixi. From there, you can publish it back to Avid. So by having these importers, exporters, we can allow for any chaotic workflow that the artists choose to make. Not only that, but I talked earlier about how artists using a specific application like Photoshop, for instance, have their own workflow, how to do things. So what we did is create scripts within Photoshop that will allow for any of the workflows that we've come across. So if you're an artist that likes to have each frame in a timeline as a storyboard panel, you can use this button here, each frame. And it will split up the frames, crop it to the show aspect ratio, save it in the proper place, version it up, do all the magic behind the scenes, and you don't have to worry about the technical complexities. You can just focus on creativity. Similar thing, if you're drawing on layers, you can export out each layer this way and send it over to Flixi. And then, as new applications come on and artists use new applications, then we can create an importer exporter for that. And one of the interesting things is that not only do we get these chaotic sort of workflows, and crazy connections across multiple applications, but without realizing it, we sort of future-proofed our process. So we recently wanted to add Unreal as part of our pre-production process. We didn't have to reinvent our pipeline. Our pipeline is designed to allow you to connect to any application. So in this case, what it meant in adding an Unreal as part of our pipeline is that we create importers, exporters to Unreal. So we can take the edit as it comes from Avid or Premiere or your application of choice, and then we can publish that to Unreal, and it will create the shots for you with the timing for each shot coming from editorial. And as you're working in Unreal, you can publish back into Flixi each shot. From there, you can publish it to Premiere or Avid, or a storyboard artist can take it, draw over the work that was output from Unreal, and then send it back to editorial, and keep this creative process going. So don't worry about the technical complexities, and use the application of your choice. And now you have all these crazy connections also as part of your process. So the last thing that I want to get into is that, so now that we have allowed these crazy connections, is there anything that we could do to improve our process? And one of the things that we've been asked for years now is a simple way to add 2D and 3D together to create visuals of storyboard panels in a 3D world. And something that we tried a long time ago, I'm going to play this test that we did for the first Hotel Transylvania movie. And you can kind of see at the bottom right corner, it says 2008. So this test is from 2008. And I'm going to play this sequence. I want to talk a little bit more once it's done. Well, it looked pretty cool, but it failed. For us, this was a failure. And it took a long time to develop the tools to build this, but the end result was that it was creating complexities as part of the process. And some of the things that we learned from this was that in this particular case, you have to have two departments working together at the same time. We create all these connections that allow these crazy data flows across multiple departments, but in those cases, the story artist is sitting at the desk and they can create storyboard panels. They don't have to wait for somebody else. But in this particular case, as they're working on the sequence, they would need to wait for a 3D artist to create the camera moves for them and time them out and then export them out so then they can draw the storyboard panels. As they're drawing the storyboard panels, they might ask for a change. It has to go back to this other department. So it was kind of slowing down the process quite a bit. Not only that, but because we added timing, you have storyboard artists that wanted it to look great. I really wanted it to look so polished and nice, so when you play back, it looks really cool and not distracting in any way by any mistakes that are happening as the sequence plays back. And now they had to worry about timing, and storyboard artists don't generally have to worry about timing, and we're adding this added task for them now to worry about timing and where they insert the storyboard panels. And also, publishing across department was slowing it down, where storyboard panels, if I'm going to publish 500 of them to editorial, might take 5 minutes. If I'm going to publish 500 shots on an animated, it's going to take a couple of hours. And because of this, you were spending more time trying to polish one shot, it means you're spending less time doing iterations. And it's also more expensive and time-consuming as an artist. And then if somebody asks for a change, well, you know what? I think we need to make that shot play back twice as fast. People were more resistant to make a change in this particular case just because it takes so long to tweak it. So that's some of the reasons why, we feel like this was a failure. And we actually moved away from this idea. But we still wanted to have a way to allow artists to work in a 3D environment and merge 2D drawings with a 3D environment. We tried a bunch of different things. Until the end, we ended up with Flixiverse that we developed and was first used across the Spider-Verse. And called it Flixiverse because it's Spider-Verse, and we're using Omniverse, so you had to have a verse in it. And we also called it the portal to your third dimension. So I'm going to play a clip on another video that was created called Beyond the Screen, I think. And it shows Yiotis Katsambas, one of our directors, using it in action. It's a very short clip, but I'm just going to play it so you can see it in action.
We were sort of building the track as the train was rolling. We were inventing technology that would support the creativity of this film and the artistry of this film.
That's it. So as you can see, for a brief second there, he's holding a game controller. And most of the story artists really familiar with Photoshop, really familiar with Storyboard Pro. As I mentioned earlier, when you try to train them on a new application, it can be disruptive to their creative process. So for a while, we're trying to find a way to allow artists to move the camera in a 3D environment. And with Flixiverse, we connected to a game controller, and everybody knows how to use a game controller. So, so that's the application. It's Flixiverse. It connects to Flixi directly. And you can select an environment that you would like to load, and loads that environment for you. And then you have the game controller to move the camera around. Super simple way to move the camera around. And rather than creating animated shots, we create stills. And so you move the game controller around, and you take a photo kind of thing. It renders out of frame, sends it to Flixi. From Flixi, you can open it in your application of choice, whether it's Photoshop, and then you can draw your storyboards right on top of it. So that's the original render. You can drop the opacity a little bit, on the background, so it's not too distracting and too busy while you have the storyboard panels. And now you have some really cool camera angles. You don't have to worry about the perspective, and that you can use as part of your creative process. We also store metadata, so when it gets into production, you could restore the camera metadata to speed up the production process. Some of the other things that we solved with Flixiverse is that in previous attempts to do something similar, we had to synchronize these 3D files across multiple locations for any artists that were working remotely. And those can be pretty large, and anytime there was a new version, you had to send them a new version, and it would take like a while. But with Flixiverse, we actually stream the viewer to a browser running on each artist's computer. So that way, everything stays local at the studio, and the speed of the loading times are much faster. They're loading the latest versions. And again, we kind of hide a lot of the complexity behind the scenes. It also meant that the artists didn't have to have these beefy machines. We have like super powerful PCs at the studio that are streaming Flixiverse to the artist's computer, and they can move the camera around pretty smoothly. So that's it. That's what I have for you today. Hope you enjoy the presentation, and thank you.